He is not a stupid man. Emotionally unbalanced, there are a lot of problems there, but this is not somebody who's stupid. He may not be well read, well versed in the world that we live in overseas beyond our borders, but this man is not stupid. He understands what he started, and he understands what he's doing. So when you look at this and you say, well, then what is going on? You have to reach two conclusions. And I gave you the first one. The first one is, well, I started this. It's the gambler's fallacy. I've got to finish it. One more throw of the dice and I'll win. That's one part. Secondly, people have got something on him, something that is so powerful. He cannot possibly deviate from the path that he's on.
Douglas MacGregor believes Washington may be approaching a decision with consequences far beyond Iran. His warning is not simply that another attack could fail. It is that America could expend critical military resources, expose its Gulf partners to retaliation, and intensify pressure on an already fragile financial system without changing the strategic outcome. MacGregor's conclusions are controversial, and several of his claims remain disputed. But the central question deserves serious attention. What happens if Washington launches a larger war and discovers that military power cannot deliver the political result it expected?
Well, I wouldn't expect a great deal to change. You've got to look at this thing from different angles. From the Iranian standpoint, they've captured the strategic high ground. They hold the initiative. We're now in the position of trying to regain it. How do we regain it? The only way to regain it is to attack Iran. How do you attack Iran? Are we going to do something new and different from what we've done in the past? I think that's pretty tough. So what are you going to do? I think you're going to do what you've done before with greater force and greater intensity if you can do it. This is kind of a return to what we call the gambler's fallacy, Dan. This somebody like Trump is a gambler, and he says, I always win. I'm a lucky guy. I always win. I know one more throw and I can win. And I think that's on his mind. Now that he's going to roll the dice again on the assumption that this time with every B-52, every B-1, every B-2, every aircraft that currently is flyable, with every bomb and munition that we can scrape together that still is precise in some way, all of that will be hurled at Iran. And this time, quote unquote, it's going to work. Now, the other thing that we can't lose sight of is that the people that put him into office are the ones that have been pushing this war. And they want this war to go on. The job now is to utterly destroy Iran. If you can't change the government, if you can't push the population into revolt, and all of that is nonsense, it was never going to happen, then what do? Well, you destroy Iran. And that's where we are.
This is the first and most important part of MacGregor's warning. He is not predicting that America lacks the ability to inflict enormous damage. He is questioning whether bombing can produce the political surrender Washington wants. Those are two very different objectives. A military can destroy infrastructure and eliminate targets without forcing its opponent to abandon its strategy. If MacGregor is right, escalating the same campaign would represent an extremely dangerous wager. Greater destruction, greater cost, but potentially the same strategic result.
Well, remember what President Trump said when he signed the MOU in Paris at Versailles. He said, I don't want to be Herbert Hoover, and I'm not going to be responsible for a global depression that results. So this is a man who understands the consequences. And what you just showed in that well, I don't know if it was a memorandum or it's just a tweet. What you showed states very clearly what the Iranians have said from the beginning. If you destroy our oil infrastructure, you destroy our power, water, and transportation networks, we will utterly obliterate everything on the other side of the Gulf. In other words, on the western side of the Persian Gulf. Now, I'm one of these people that is unconvinced that any of the little statelets that are on the western side of the Gulf are going to survive this. I don't think people in the United States realize how fragile those states are, how little they can mobilize in terms of military power to defend themselves. Saudi Arabia is viewed like the UAE is very duplicitous, as playing all sides to the middle. And so the Iranians, their attitude is these people have screwed us. taken advantage of us, hurt us, harmed us, cooperated with our enemies, the Israelis and others, on a routine basis. So we have no compunction or hesitation whatsoever about destroying them. I think President Trump realizes that, and I'm sure that he has been reluctant to take action. However, Israelis don't care, and their agents in Washington don't care. They could care less. As far as they're concerned, everybody in the region can die if it's going to promote their dominance, their control of the region. I mean, frankly, that's it. All you have to do is listen to the Israeli leadership. They make that abundantly clear. So I think we're back to where we started. President Trump, if he pushes, let's put it this way, there's three doors. Door number one is reopen the war with everything you've got. Door number two is do nothing. And door number three is do a little and then try to negotiate. Well, you've already tried door number one. You're going to go back to door number one? Well, maybe so. Door number two, do nothing. That's not up for consideration. He can't sustain himself politically. Money that is vital to his survival in the White House to deliver the Congress is at risk. Remember the hundreds of millions of dollars that are being assembled in various funds to destroy people like Thomas Massie, or for that matter, Marjorie Taylor Greene, or anyone who opposes this war with Iran, that those funds can be applied to destroy Donald Trump. And Donald Trump knows that. Right now, those funds are being committed to his support and defense. Those funds are vital to his survival because they can prevent any impeachment. So doing nothing is a non-starter. What about door number three? Well, we know that President Netanyahu was furious at President Trump's decision to postpone the attack. And lots of people are saying, well, he's reconsidering. But we also know there are problems with the munitions, and we are waiting for resupply, and we're bringing more aircraft into the theater. So there are other things going on here as well. So my point is, when you look at the three doors, you could try door three again, but that hasn't been very fruitful. So you're really being pushed back to door number one, which is all-out war.
The danger MacGregor identifies is that another attack may not remain confined to Iran. Gulf economies depend on tightly concentrated oil facilities, desalination plants, ports, power networks, and transportation corridors. Even limited disruption could affect energy markets and global shipping. That is what transforms this from a regional military calculation into an economic threat. Washington would have to consider not only whether its aircraft could reach their targets, but whether its partners and the global economy could absorb the retaliation that might follow.
What I can tell you is that the defense industry, if you ask somebody at the top of the defense industry, I talked recently to someone who spent much of his life in it. He said, let's understand something, Doug. First of all, there is no declared war. In the absence of a declared war, we haven't mobilized industry. We're expecting industry to behave today the way it behaved in 1944-45 without mobilization. That's the first thing. You've got to essentially move resources, people, capabilities from the private sector into the defense sector. We haven't done it, and we're not going to get the outcome that he wants. The other thing is that there's a big difference between building missiles and putting together jeeps or tanks. You're not just screwing on lug nuts. You're dealing with assembly lines that are very complex. They involve human beings, not just robotics. There are some robotics, but a lot of it is human intervention to ensure that the microchips, the microcircuitry, and everything else is where it belongs, because these are very expensive. It's use it once, throw it away. If you're going to use it, it has to work. And most of what we produce does have good reliability. Now, we can argue about the air and missile defense. That's a different issue. And a lot of that technology is not new. But if you look at the standard missiles, you look at the strike weapons that we have, those are really state of the art, and they have a very good performance rating. But you can't just produce them, crank them out the way we cranked out Sherman tanks or B-17 bombers. It doesn't work that way. So we got to say those things. And I think Trump, I assume he knows that. And these threats about people leaking, nobody's leaked anything of real significance. I certainly have never seen anything that I thought was classified. But there is such a thing as general knowledge. And people in the armed forces are not stupid. Sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines know what is real and what isn't. They know what they've got and what they don't. And so right now, the percentages, I've heard people say we've got only 20 to 30% of what we need. I've heard people saying only 20 or less. I've heard other people say different things. The point is that we have exhausted our arsenal to a large extent. Are we at risk now of going under in a war with a major power? Not unless we attack somebody and we're stupid. We could, but nobody wants a war with us. And I think probably inwardly President Trump understands that. And I think his view is, well, we're not giving up and we're going to use what we have and build back up later. I suspect that's going on as a conversation.
This may be the interview's biggest practical revelation. The issue is not simply how many weapons exist today. It is how rapidly highly sophisticated missiles and interceptors can be replaced after they're used. Modern weapons depend on specialized components, trained workers, complex supply chains, and limited production lines. That means a short, intense conflict can consume equipment far faster than industry can replenish it. MacGregor's specific estimates require independent verification, but the underlying production problem is real, and it directly limits how long any campaign can continue.
Well, you and I agree that the high probability is that strategic in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it turns out to be, and we don't know when he's going to pull the trigger, we'll be in the same position we were at the beginning. I think you're right. At that point, there's either nothing left or so little that we can't afford to continue. And of course, we're not even talking about what's happening in the private sector. We're not talking about the market.
Yeah.
Trump has developed this culture of manipulation, which has helped to create the illusion of wealth and prosperity. The market keeps rising and rising, and everybody says this is great. It's back to, 1929 in June. Everything looked the way it does right now. October, things changed radically. But people that say those things are saying, no, you're wrong. No, it's not going to work that way. I keep telling people I'm not an expert, but I listen to people who are. And if you go down the list, you listen to Luke Roman and Jeffrey Gundlach, you listen to Pilkington or Jeff Curie on oil, the situation is not good. It's very, very fragile. It's very dangerous. And what they point to is something that most Americans don't pay any attention to, and that's you go and look at the treasuries and you say, well, the 10-year treasury is at 4.7. All the experts say if it rises to 5%, we're in real trouble. We won't be able to sustain that debt. We can't pay it all. We can't pay the required payment. And at the same time, they say, well, interest rates will fall. When they fall, that's okay. But, right now they're rising. And so that means bonds have to fall. Well, unfortunately, interest rates are rising and the bond yields are rising at the same time. This is sort of a double envelopment for disaster. But all the great men on Wall Street that are friends with Donald Trump are all saying, oh, no, don't worry about that. And remember what Mellon said in June of 1929. He was the Secretary of the Treasury. He was in Besant's job. And he said, we live in an era of unbroken prosperity.
Yeah, and you can see where that 10-year Treasury yield has gone just up since March, when right about the time this war started, and it's continuing on a general trend upward to where we might potentially get to that 5% point you're talking about.
There's another quick example to talk about, and that is our intervention to bail out the yen for the Bank of Japan. And we went into a fund of euros, access to euros that we have. I don't know where that is or how that works, but we pumped great quantities of euros into Japan to rescue the yen. Now have we solved the problem? Have we ended the indebtedness? Is Japan now on the path to prosperity and goodness? No, it's a temporary fix. Why did we use euros instead of dollars? Because the dollar has been weakening against the euro.